Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jelani Cobb, and I'm the Dean of Columbia. Oh, thank you. That's what it is. I'm the Dean of this illustrious institution, and I'm just going to say a few words of welcome, and then I have the honor of inviting our President, President Shafik, up to officially welcome everyone. And so first, I want to say that I know just a smidge about the president's schedule, and it is really bananas. And so we're really thrilled that she could take the time to be with us for this occasion today. We also want to note that today is the culmination of Purim, the Jewish celebratory holiday, as well as today is Holi, which is the very significant Hindu holiday. So we want to acknowledge that, and in addition, today's my daughter's 7th birthday. So she's going to be here. She's going to be here at some point. I think she's off doing celebrity stuff. And I just want to give a quick thank you. There are a lot of people who we have to thank for making this possible. Of course, our first thank you goes to Mark and Cookie Mason, who have gifted the bust of Ida B. Wells to us. They'll join us later today, along with our planning committee, which consists of Pamela McKelvin Jefferson, our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She's around here. There she is right there. And Akintunde Ahmad, Kevin Bentley, who is our Major Gifts Officer, Wayne Dawkins. I saw Wayne. Where's Wayne? Oh, there you go, over there. Brandon Drennan, who is here as well. I told Brandon something. Brandon was in my class, and I said that we have a very quick turnaround here. It's like you can be in my class 1 year and then working together on stories the next year. And sure enough, he was in my class 1 year, and we were working together on a story the following year. Dawn Kissy, class of 2005, Sydney T. Lane, and Kelly Spencer, who is our Director of Alumni Relations. And not the least, we also want to thank our partners. The Lippman Center, Director Robe Imbriano is here as well in the back. And we are happy to partner with the African American Policy Forum and Professor Kim Crenshaw, who is right in front of me. Okay, so with that, I will get out of the way and open the floor for President Shafik. President Shafik, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jelani, and thank you all for coming here today to honor the peerless Ida B. Wells. We're gathered here on the anniversary of her death during Women's History Month to discuss her life and legacy and unveil a bust that will be placed in the main lobby of Pulitzer Hall. I wanted to begin by thanking some of the people who Jelani thanked who are responsible for planning and executing this event, including our beloved Dean, Jelani Cobb, our guest, the artist, Dana King, and our distinguished panelists, both from within Columbia and beyond. I also wanted to thank Daniel Duster, Ida B. Wells' grandson, who's joining us today. To honor Mrs. Wells is to marvel at the caliber of her journalism, the strength of her convictions, and the unimaginable courage that she was able to summon again and again in the fight for equal rights. Here at Columbia, our mission is to educate future generations, to advance human knowledge, and to engage with local and global challenges. And I can't think of anyone who personifies that more than Ida B. Wells. She was a dedicated educator, a tenacious truth seeker, a brilliant storyteller, among many other talents. Now, the details of her life are probably well known to most of you. She was born into slavery in Holly Springs, Mississippi, in the middle of the Civil War. She came of age during Reconstruction and started her career as a teacher to support her orphan siblings when her parents died. She then moved to Memphis, eventually becoming a journalist and a civil rights activist, as well as a newspaper owner. Most famously, she dedicated herself to shining a light on the barbarous lynching of Black people in the South, doing extensive research and visiting places where people had been murdered and mutilated. She did this armed with a gun because she knew that law enforcement would not protect her. Indeed, her printing press was destroyed while she was out of town by a Memphis mob that had threatened to kill her. She ended up leaving the South and moving to Chicago, and she devoted herself to touring the US and the UK to raise awareness about what she had seen, read, and heard. She also advocated for women's suffrage, particularly Black women's suffrage. In 2020, the Pulitzer Prize Board awarded her a special citation for her outstanding and courageous reporting on the horrific and vicious violence against African Americans during the era of lynching. It was a prize that was long overdue, as is the inclusion of her bust here in the lobby of the Columbia Journalism School. I'm especially excited about this unveiling because it's a reminder that while we cannot change the past, we can tell new stories that will change the future. Today, you will hear from distinguished scholars, writers, and journalists, and they will discuss the struggle for racial equity in this country and the impact of Ida B. Wells' life and career. They'll give you a window into the generations of women who've carried on her legacy and the road that led the artist, Dana King, from journalism to the kind of work that has brought her here today. It'll be an illuminating and important afternoon, and I'm thrilled that we're hosting it here at Columbia. And so with that, I want to thank all of you again for joining us for this very special day, and I want to turn the podium over to Pamela McKelvin, who will begin our first panel.
All right. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome to the stage. First up is our moderator, Errin Haines. She's an award-winning political journalist and a founding mother and editor-at-large for The 19th, a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom covering the intersection of women, politics, and policy. She is also an MSNBC contributor. So we can give it up for Ms. Haines. Followed by Ms. Haines is panelist Professor Kimberlé Crenshaw, popularly known for her development of intersectionality, critical race theory, and the Say Her Name campaign. Kimberlé is the co-founder and executive director of the African American Policy Forum, who are our partners here today, and they have a booth downstairs giving away books, so you should check it out and ask them why they're giving them away. What's the purpose? She's also the founder and executive director of the Center for Intersectionality and Social Policy Studies at Columbia Law School, and the Isidore and Seville Solbacher Professor of Columbia Law School. Let's welcome to the stage Professor Kimberlé Crenshaw. Last but certainly not least, we welcome to the stage Nikole Hannah-Jones, a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter covering racial injustice for the New York Times Magazine and creator of the landmark The 1619 Project, now a Hulu original docuseries. Nikole is the co-founder of the Ida B. Wells Society for Investigative Reporting at Morehouse College and founder of the 1619 Freedom School in her hometown of Waterloo, Iowa. She is also the Center for Journalism and Democracy. She also leads the Center for Journalism and Democracy at Harvard University and is the Knight Chair. Howard University. Ew, huge faux pas. You know, where she is the Knight Chair in Race and Journalism. Give it up for Howard University president. I'm speaking it to existence.
Wow, thank you so much for that introduction. Ida was kind of side-eyeing you for a minute, though, with that. We're going to get it together. Well, listen, I mean, it is such an honor and a privilege to be on stage, not only with the two of you, but on this such an auspicious occasion. Just looking out into the audience, I see founders of NABJ. I see so many HBCU students in the audience. I see my friend and dean of this prestigious institution. It is deeply moving, and to be here to talk about the vision, the visionary Ida B. Wells on the occasion of this bust unveiling it is a tremendous honor. And so I am certainly pleased to be here. I'm certainly pleased that all of you are here, and I am pleased to be really unveiling this symposium with a conversation about something that I think is absolutely appropriate given the reason that we are here, and that is a conversation about America's tug of war for racial equality. So, I'm just going to get started with a quote from Ida B. Wells from her autobiography, Crusade for Justice. She said that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. We know that Black women have been the sentinels of our democracy, shining a light to right wrongs in the tradition of the great Ida B. Wells. So the history of our country has always been one of the competing forces of racial progress and racial backlash. I want to start by asking each of you, Nikole and Kimberlé, how do you see the moment that we are currently in as a democracy, and how are we seeing Black women meeting this moment?
Well, first of all, what an honor, what a pleasure it is to be here. How excited I am that this bust is being unveiled here, but importantly being unveiled now.
Yes.
Because there's so many ways, we were just talking earlier, that this moment is a moment that parallels, replicates, amplifies exactly the time that Ida B. Wells came onto the scene. And there's so many ways that her trajectory during the moment of redemption gives us a window into what I think we all see as redemption 2.0. In ways that really draw out, I think, not simply the efforts of the faction that wants to return us to a period long before the various projects of liberation actually took hold, but the institutions that should actually be on our side and resisting it actually not showing up, or to the extent they do show up in many troubling ways, help to facilitate this. And of course, I'm talking about law, I'm talking about the media, and I'm also talking about institutions of education. So one of the things that my good friend and mentor that I'm seeing here in the second row, Paula Giddings, sent to me when she was doing her magnificent book on Ida B. Wells, she sent me the handwritten decision that was made in Ida B. Wells's suit when she was kicked off a train, kicked out of the ladies' car. And, when we talk about Black women as leaders, as the shock troops, these are the kind of stories that we don't actually remember as much as we should. And not remembering those stories means that we're not really able to fully historicize what backlash actually looks like. So I taught civil rights cases, I taught segregation cases for years before I even knew that Ida B. Wells, along with almost every Black woman leader of her generation, had a moment in which they were kicked out of the ladies' car, right?
Forcibly removed.
Forcibly removed. And of course, that was a follow-up to Sojourner Truth, also being kicked out. Harriet Tubman being kicked out, her arm was actually broken. We don't tell that story as much, and when we don't tell it, we don't have a sense that racial progress is not a constantly upward, ever moving forward dynamic. In fact, their being kicked off was a retrenchment. It was a recognition that even being a woman, even being a well-dressed woman, does not mean from here on in that you will be treated as a lady. There had been a tradition of allowing the women like Ida B. Wells to be in the car. But Ida B., Mary Church Terrell, we could go on and on, each had that moment. What does it mean that we don't remember it in that way? It means, number one, we don't recognize how the intersections of race and gender actually are sites of anti-Black racism, and therefore what happens to women is not a side issue, it's a central issue in being literate, being able to see, understand the signals about what is happening. That's number one, first and foremost. Number two was the fact that Ida B. Wells' use of journalism to actually draw out the complacency, the contribution of the North to reconciliation, the way that our paper of record actually told the story of lynching, Moss and his other partners in a way that just contributed to the lynching narrative, rather than telling the narrative of these were Black successful business people who were being lynched not because of any allegation of sexual impropriety, but because they were challenging the system.
Yes.
Her telling of the story and the other papers telling the story tell us everything we need to know about how reconciliation came about why this retrenchment was so absolute and so powerful, how the forces that should have been in place to push back against it were not. Fast forward ahead, where are we at right now? We are in the middle of a retrenchment that is every bit as robust. We are also in a moment where the role of Black women in this retrenchment as avatars for the kinds of Blackness that is no longer tolerable has been used as a target, and that targeting of Black women has not mobilized the forces that it should have. So let's take, for example, what's happened to Claudine Gay. Let's take, for example, the way the media became a weapon of the far right. And look, it's not a secret. They told us. They said exactly what they were going to do. They played the play earlier with CRT. They played the play earlier with 1619, saying outrageous things over and over and over and over again until it got picked up by the mainstream media, and picked up by the mainstream media not as a story to interrogate where these campaigns are coming from, what they're trying to do, what they've said they're trying to do, basically to attack public education, to attack the university, to attack the knowledge that was produced after the civil rights movement. They've been clear about what they were going to do. That's not what's reported. What's reported is the defamation. What's reported is the misframing. What's reported is all the old ideas about how your civil rights violate my civil rights, parental rights, states' rights. All of these are signals of those moments in the past in which retrenchment has happened. So now we're in a moment where everything that we've been telling people for the last 3 years that was going to happen is now happening. So the attack is metastasized. It's no longer critical race theory. It's no longer 1619. It's no longer wokeness per se. It's DEI. It is departments. It's sociology. It's ethnic studies. It's any acknowledgement that there is still a problem of race and inclusion in this society. Any acknowledgement of that has now become targeted. So when I think about Ida, I think both about what she was able to show us, how you go about challenging retrenchment. But I also think that Ida's life tells us about why sometimes these messages aren't being taken up to the extent they should be. So when we say trust Black women, I don't see that as simply an empty phrase or simply a stereotype, but actually to go back in history to see the moments where Black women were the targets, when Black women were speaking about the contours of retrenchment, and perhaps because of their being women, it wasn't taken as seriously as it should. They were marginalized in both feminist movements and anti-racist movements, and that marginalization has been the Achilles heel of American democracy that now, we've seen the consequences of it. The question is, will we learn the lesson from those consequences?
Amen. Okay. Well, Nikole, I could ask you what you think about this. I know a lot of what you think about this because I just read your excellent piece in New York Times Magazine, literally laying out the case for where we are in this moment in our democracy. But I guess if you had anything to add to that in this moment, what would you say about the moment that we are in, and how are you seeing Black women meeting this moment?
Well, one, I could just, sit at your knee and learn
Right.
every day, truly. And happy to be here on this occasion. As many of you know, I've spent a decade now trying to help bring, along with many people in this room, Ida B. Wells Barnett into her correct place in history. And it is important that she is being recognized in the pantheon of great journalists, as she should be. When you go through J school and you learn about the great journalists you are to emulate, Ida B. Wells has never been included. Even though she was an innovator of investigative reporting techniques, she was one of the original data reporters. And certainly when I was a young Black girl in Iowa trying to find someone who had done the thing that I wanted to do, Ida B. Wells was the person whose biography showed me every type of badass woman and Black journalist I might want to be. So it's just amazing to be here in this moment, but also scary as hell. So
Right.
let's be clear. When you ask that question, I actually think thinking about the arc of Ida B. Wells' life is instructive, in that this was a woman who was born into a system of chattel slavery that had lasted for 250 years. She gets to live about 12 to 20 years in a period where we actually attempt to have some multiracial democracy in the United States. So she goes from Black people not even being treated as human beings, having no legal rights, no citizenship, to this kind of amazing period of possibility. Yeah. And then she watches as all of that gets taken away. And then we'll live to see us enter a period of really about 70 years of racial apartheid, and we'll not live to see its end. So what does that tell you? What that tells you is that what we tend to think of as a nation that's always moving forward, that's always progressing, and then we have these periods of backlash, is in fact the inverse of that. And that the story of America is Black people were never supposed to be citizens. We were never supposed to be part of democracy. We were brought here as forced laborers. And once they realized slavery was ending, they wanted to ship us elsewhere, because even the great emancipator didn't believe that we could be compatible with American democracy. And so what we've had is a country that never wanted multiracial democracy, that was not created to be a multiracial democracy, and because of Black resistance has had these brief periods of racial progress, but they are brief. So I think we take comfort in this narrative that times were tough back then, but we're always moving forward. We're not. Most times we're not. And so we are in a period of massive retrenchment. And Kimberlé and I were talking backstage. The fear is that we're not recognizing how dangerous of a period that we're in. Our democracy is at a point of failure. We don't know if our democracy will hold, and truthfully, whether or not Trump gets elected is almost irrelevant at this point, because the people who have sown the seeds to erode democratic institutions, to erode the norms of democracy, those seeds will be here, and they are flourishing whether or not Trump ultimately descends to the presidency again. So what studying Ida B. Wells' life and studying this history tells us is we have a choice to make in the country about what country we're going to be. And I think sometimes we get lulled into a sense of complacency because we really believe things will move forward. They will move forward, but not for us. Not in the way that we want them to, unless we make some very different choices. And by we, I don't mean Black women. Because let's be clear, the role that Black women have always played, being at the intersection of oppression. Black women can see this country with a clarity I would argue that almost no other group can see. Black women, back in the times of Ida B. Wells, before the times of Ida B. Wells, had this truly inclusive vision for democracy, but also understood the dangers, the reality. And that's the role that Black women have continued to play. There aren't enough of us to save America on our own. But that is the burden that Black women have played. So when I look at, the reason why one studies history is so that you don't repeat the mistakes of the past. so that you can learn from what happened and hopefully make different choices. Or you can study history to learn how to make that history repeat, and to learn about how people of goodwill will allow a lot of terrible things to be done in their name, which is what has happened. So when I look at where are we going to go in this country right now? Why do we see the types of bans, not just on books? That's not a new tactic in the United States, but bans on the teaching of ideas, bans on the ability to be able to have certain discussions in a classroom. Then I was thinking a lot about the gag order in Congress in 1837. There was a gag order in Congress that you could not bring up abolition on the floor of the House of Representatives. You couldn't bring petitions on abolition. You couldn't discuss abolition. Why is that? Because when you control what people are able to think about, what people are able to discuss, then you control the policy. You control what we will accept and what we can imagine. So the reason why you ban curricula, you ban books, you ban Black history in particular, you disband DEI, you disband sociology, particularly sociology, is because you kill social movements by killing our ability to understand why social movements exist in the first place, why social movements are necessary. So that's the period that we're in. And I just fear that those of us, again, Ida B. Wells as a lesson, right? Ida B. Wells was ostracized for speaking the truth. She was discounted for speaking the truth. Even in Black organizations who were so concerned about their fundraising, about respectability, that they ostracized her as well. We see that happening still with truth tellers. Who do we defend? Why do we defend them? How long are we willing to defend them? So yeah, that's how I feel. People who've ever seen me talk know you don't bring me on stage to give no hope. That's not what I do. I'm the one, I hope that I come up here and give you a punch in the gut and tell you we should be afraid, because we have seen where this country can go. We have the perfect Supreme Court to enact that type of vision. We have not seen a Supreme, I'm gonna end because she's gonna get to ask us 2 questions and the lecture gonna be over. We haven't seen a Supreme Court this conservative since racial apartheid. The last court we saw that was this conservative ushered in racial apartheid in the United States. They have the perfect court and political arena to enact a vision that will forever cement the racial caste system, but also women's rights, obviously, other marginalized people's rights. You have a governor on the border who is trying to pass a law that says you can shoot immigrants for coming across the border, and we're all kind of just chilling about it. So yeah, that's where we are. Sorry.
No, do not apologize, either one of you, because there's a lot going on, and there's a lot to say about what is going on. And again, Ida's words echo across history. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, right? Nikole, I want to come back to something that, you were talking about the moral clarity of Black women, which is absolutely something that I think is just one of our superpowers, because Black women are instilled with a very strong sense of right and wrong, probably because we've been at the bottom of you name it aspect of society, and that has given us a unique vantage point on this country. I want to talk to each of you about how you see yourselves as part of that tradition. Where does that come from for you?
I think about, I'm obsessed with Ida B. Wells, as people know. And I think about how it must have felt to be writing about a crime, right? Every day, and not feeling like you can gain any traction on that thing, right? Never saw anti-lynching legislation passed. Never saw that taken seriously as a political issue. And yet you know the truth of this. And so when I think about the issues I cover, I also don't expect the issues I cover will change, that they are so embedded in our society. And we see daily the devastating consequences of that, particularly amongst Black Americans, but really in our entire country. So I just see my role, though, as you have to bear witness. And that's what she did. Like, you are sometimes writing for today, and you are sometimes writing for the future. So people can't look back and say, we didn't know better, that Black people were just taking it and accepting what was being done. And so there's an importance to that. It is critical for us to write that thing that needs to be written and to bear witness in these times, even if ultimately we don't know that we have the power to change it, because one day it will change,
And by
even
the way,
if we don't see it.
That is a central tenet of journalism, to leave behind the most honest and accurate record of who and where we are as a country, right? I mean, that's not just the charge of Black women. That is the charge of any of us who are in this profession. Should be trying to do that. Certainly what Ida B. Wells was about. Kimberlé, how do you see yourself as part of that tradition and really where that comes from for you?
Yeah.
It's a lot, y'all. I know.
It's a lot. It is a lot. You know, I was nodding at absolutely everything, especially when you talked about how many of our own organizations are not showing up. And, you know, sometimes I feel a way about that. Like, what did you think? Did you think that they were just coming after 1619 and CRT, and all y'all had to do is like, we're not doing that, and people would be satisfied that they weren't coming after the entire project. They're coming after us. They're coming after our place, our space, all of that. I mean, when you look at what they're coming after with the Fearless Fund, right? This is Black women trying to give other sisters $20,000 to get a business going when they get less than 1% of all venture capital.
You would think we were getting 100%.
And they're going after that. Like, you can't even help yourselves. You know, that level of malicious disempowerment happening right now. You think about that, and again, you're wondering, are y'all seeing this? Is anybody disturbed or upset about it? Are people moving? And so there is this sense that maybe we need to say it louder. Maybe we need to say it, you know, more places. And then you get into this sort of John Henryanism, but it's Joan Henry. Like, okay, I'm going to try to, you know, go as many places as possible to actually paint the picture that when they're coming after this stuff, or when they're demonizing stuff like critical race theory, they're demonizing your thinking. They're demonizing every moment that you realize that colorblindness is a myth. Every moment you realize that colorblindness is a race-conscious project to erase our capacity to see, understand, and dismantle white supremacy. So every time you give your kid the talk, you are a critical race theorist. Every time you put your hand at 10 and 2 o'clock on the steering wheel when you see a siren behind you, you are practicing a theory that race matters, an experience that you may have. That is the thing that they're trying to say you can no longer teach, you can no longer talk about, you can no longer think. So I watch this stuff and I wonder where everybody at, right? Why they're not stepping up. And so in the moments where it kind of feels like, or people will ask, you know, what are you doing for self-care? Why don't you step back? And that's when I go back to Ida B. and so many of the others who, you know, didn't step back. They leaned in with the belief that, the hope that they would see something in their lifetime, but the possibility that they might not, and a conviction that they're at least going to pass on a prism for the future to be able to see more clearly what they have inherited. So I draw on that from the figures in history that have taught me, from my own mother, you know, who was always in a fight with somebody, you know, about some way that they were acquiescing to, you know, second-class treatment, and knowing that when, you know, people saw her coming, they were like, oh, here comes Mary Crenshaw again, telling us that we ought to do this, do that, and it was meaningful. It shaped her life, and it also shapes mine.
Yeah, you saw that and saw a Black woman who said over and over again, not on my watch. And that is what you feel compelled to do. What I know, Nikole, you feel compelled to do.
I need to second what Kimberlé, Dr. Crenshaw, said about, when 1619 was being attacked, there was a lot of silence, even from organizations that are supposed to be speaking out on free speech, organizations that allegedly, right, that this was their thing. Yeah. Literal laws were being passed that only targeted the 1619 Project, not a theory, not a realm of books, but just the 1619 Project, and there was silence around that. Now, regular folks were advocating, but institutions were not. And I said, just what you said, they're not just coming for 1619, right? They send out test balloons. They see, what will we allow? We allow that, they go a little bit further. So then they said, okay, now we're gonna come for this thing called critical race theory. And the response was not, it would be amazing if 6th grade teachers were teaching a highly sophisticated legal analysis, right, of racial inequality in the United States.
Instead,
the response was, instead of mock slave auctions, right, the response was, oh, we're not teaching that. We're not teaching that.
Maybe this is harmful. Let's explore.
Right, so this fear. So thinking, if we keep backing away, if we keep not defending our ground, if we don't control our own narrative, if we just acquiesce, they'll stop. Okay, so they did all the anti-critical race theory bans. Now what? Now they're eliminating DEI offices. Now they're coming for not just the Fearless Fund. They have now threatened Howard University. Right, so now they're saying even institutions that were founded from Black exclusion cannot help Black people in professions that are completely excluded from. So my question is, when do the institutions rise up? How much do they have to take from us before we will defend our own? And by the way, defending our own is defending democracy. So I have to just second that, like just the sheer silence when overwhelmingly Black women were bearing the burden of being out here being targets, being out here trying to tell the truth despite all of that. And we did not have institutions have our back. So how many things are they going to have to come for before we wake up?
Yeah, and realizing that it is not the individuals. I mean, yes, the individuals are being targeted, and yes, that absolutely comes at a personal cost. But yes, they are seeking to dismantle.
And they are winning.
They are winning.
Like,
yeah,
they're winning right now.
Yeah. But I do want to ask both of you, because this work does come at a personal cost, and that's real. I want you, if you can, to just share what that looks like. I have a sense of why you keep going. Ida B. Wells is certainly part of why you keep going. But yes, while it is true that these things may not be solved in your lifetime, it is also true that you cannot not do the work that you are doing. So, but again, it does come at a personal cost, and frankly, Black women are unprotected, and including in journalism, including in academia, in every space of public life. So, yes, talk about that if you can.
To wake up every day and realize the contingencies of one's expectations of solidarity when much of what you do comes out of a sense of writing for, about, and to the freedom of marginalized groups. It's a contradiction that you have to kind of walk every day. And, obviously having people historically who set that pathway of walking that contradiction, being, inheritors of their willingness to do that helps. It helps a lot. But, nothing does the trick like someone being able to say, okay, I see what this is about. How can we help? How do we become activated in this moment? And that's just few and far between. I get responses that say, well, is this electable issue? From some of the legacy civil rights organizations. How did it poll? How did it test? It's like, thank God they didn't have polling during the March on Washington. Could you imagine how they would have edited Martin Luther King's speech?
What speech?
What
speech? He wouldn't have happened. No.
And I'll just be honest, in my institutions, asking, what are you going to do about the fact that an entire field of study is being defamed And you have people in this institution who do that work. Do you think there's any responsibility to say anything about that? And what I get is, you need to be able to handle criticism.
Yeah, they're happy to sit back and let you do it.
I was like, we have no problem handling criticism, but what this is an attempt to take the words out of our mouths. This is silencing. This is about raising the costs of talking about that which shall not be named. And as Nikole said, if you can't name a problem, if you can't articulate it, if you can't denaturalize racial subordination and all of its consequences, if you can't do that, you can't transform it, you can't change it, you can't address it. And that, at the end of the day, is the point. Now, I was never under an illusion that the university as an entity or free speech people were on all points aligned with the substantive project of Black liberation. But I was under the misconception, illusion that there was a limit to how much repression could be tolerated within institutions that are dedicated to academic freedom, freedom of expression, that these were not substantive measures, but they were basically about the pursuit of ideas, the whole, marketplace. I thought that at least that would hold. And recognizing that actually it's not holding, very much at all. Recognizing that even some of our gateway institutions, I mentioned earlier, maybe I did, the College Board effectively allowing Ronald DeSantis to decide what is valuable and significant in African American studies, allowing a bureaucrat to decide that Audre Lorde doesn't need to be taught, a bureaucrat to decide that intersectionality is no longer useful because it had been so distorted by the right. So effectively giving hecklers veto power to those who basically said, this is our plan, we're gonna heckle and heckle and heckle, and force the center to repudiate these people, these ideas, these projects. He said it, they did it, the institutions played along, and there really are no consequences to that, at least as far as I can tell
no
right
consequences.
now.
Other states following
Other
suit.
states following suit, and it reminds me, and I say this a lot, I think it's a miracle that we got out of enslavement. I think it's a miracle that we got out of segregation, because the ways in which institutions and interests always try to find a way to facilitate, to play along, not to bear the cost of dismantling white supremacy, almost always created incentives for people, even who look like us, to play along with it. And it's not lost on what Nikole just said, that we have the most conservative court that we've had since Reconstruction, and the court is really not the Roberts Court. It's the Thomas Court. And we haven't really talked honestly about how he got there. We haven't talked honestly about how the misremembering of Black women's conditions created a set of assumptions that actually benefited him. When Anita Hill came forward and told her story, most people were split on that confirmation, including in the Black community. When Anita Hill started talking about what had actually happened to her, and he threw down the lynching card.
Yeah, another Black woman truth teller.
Another truth teller
whose truth came at a personal cost.
The meaning of not having that history. Too many Black people basically concluded that Anita Hill was acting like a white woman in telling a story of sexual harassment. Too many people bought the argument that sexual harassment was a white woman's issue and not a Black woman's issue. Why did they come to that conclusion? Because the real history about Black women and sexual abuse, the fact that sexual harassment was a condition of work since we got here, the fact that enslavement was about institutionalized sexual abuse, the fact that the real mothers of this country are black women because we produced that property, that is not part of our history and not part of our remembrance. So when she said that,
saying it's part of our condition, it's part of our condition that we should accept. Yes,
it's natural. So when that was said, when the New York Times published an op-ed saying that even if Anita Hill was telling the technical truth, she was basically lying because black women recognized what she claimed he did as down-home courting. It was naturalizing a cultural defense. Black women take this kind of stuff. That's who we are. The only reason people were not able to understand Anita Hill as coming out of a history of black women always fighting this, including Rosa Parks, who got her start not in the Montgomery bus boycott, but in fighting against the erasure of black women who were raped. We didn't have access to that history. So when he said this was high-tech lynching, it brought millions of black people along. That brought millions of civil rights activists along, millions of liberals along. And then white women, feminists, weren't able to say, actually, there is a racial history of black women being subordinated. So what did we get? We got a far-right appointment to the Supreme Court. So when you look around now and you see campaign finance reform, gone. That's why we have a political system in which people are able to buy their way into office. When you see Voting Rights Act basically gutted, when you see affirmative action gutted, when you see environmental protections gutted, most of these were 5-4 votes that Thomas's confirmation made possible. So when we talk about black women leadership and their voices being erased and intersectionality, that just isn't a problem for us. It's a problem for democracy. Our democracy is on the edge because we were not able to believe Anita Hill and other black women who were telling us what time it is.
Right, go ahead. And by the way, waiting for white women to show up, I could talk to you all about the 19th Amendment all day long. By the way, we've just extended this symposium to 3 days. We need more than this afternoon to get into all of this. We are going to leave some time for questions from you all for these two brilliant black women. But I think before we open it up for questions, I want to ask, because Nikole, you brought up, 4 years ago we had this rallying cry, trust black women, believe black women, listen to black women. Black women are doing the work, right? And again, in a nod to the 19th Amendment, we know that black women are looking for somebody to join us in that work. Didn't happen in 1920. Ida B. Wells was certainly pretty lonely out here. When is America going to listen to us? What is the cost of democracy continuing to ignore us? Because we are doing the work. Nikole?
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I don't even know how to answer that question because one, as a journalist, I try not to predict the future because I don't like being wrong. But I want to turn that question just a little bit because we are in a school of journalism. We are here honoring Ida B. Wells Barnett. And so I want to talk a bit just about the role of media in aiding and abetting where we are. So we know that during the time of lynching, white media was hand in hand, right, with the lynchers. They would advertise the lynching was happening. They would gin up the frenzied mob. They were basically making it possible to not have any due process. If there was to be due process, they would say, this is the jail that the person is in. So the role that white media, what we call mainstream media, has played, we can see those parallels, right? So as Ida B. Wells is writing, you have white media writing against her, publishing against her, calling her a fraud. Right, calling her a fraud, saying she was literally using their own reporting to track how many black people were lynched, what was the actual excuse for the lynching. She was using their reporting because she understood they were going to come for her. So when we look at the role that the media is playing today, we can look at something like what happened with critical race theory. We can look at what happened with Claudine Gay, where you have actors who are saying, this is what we're going to do. They understand how the media operates. So they said, we're just going to keep pushing this story, keep pushing it until it becomes impossible for mainstream media not to report it. Even though they have said, we're coming after her, we're using plagiarism to come after DEI, they don't even have to be sophisticated about it. Chris Rufo puts it out in tweets. And yet, he understands how broken American media is, that he can say, we're going to do this, we're going to start a propaganda campaign, and we will get it seated in the media, and all we need is one mainstream media publication to cover it as a legitimate story, and the rest will. Because the rest of them don't want to appear like they are ignoring a story. And media is so afraid of being cast as being too liberal that they overcorrect to the point of not being truthful, of actually delivering misinformation. So that too is the role, right? So you had news organizations didn't want to cover the issue of 1619, didn't want to cover the issue of CRT in the right way, in an honest way, that, for instance, Moms for Liberty is a white nationalist women's movement. They don't want to cover it that way, even though that's the truth. So when we think about why we're here today, it is also to talk about that. If democracy fails, it'll be because the fourth estate has failed. Because we are the firewall of democracy. And we don't have enough people like myself, like Errin, right, who are journalists who are trying to write that correct story. And instead, we're told that we're the ones who are biased. Right. That we are the issue, even as what we wrote 2 years ago comes to pass. Even
2
as
years ago,
5 years ago, 10 years ago, my whole career.
Yes.
Though I could not even ever have imagined when I became a journalist that we would be actually where we are right now.
20 years of covering race to be back here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that. And I also want to say something about that there is a cost to black women. There's this idea that black women are strong. We are. But how old was Ida B. Wells when she died? How old was Fannie Lou Hamer when she died? So many of us don't live long lives. So yeah, it is true that we are going to keep doing this work no matter what. But it's also true that in doing this work, we are likely cutting our own lives short. In doing this work alone, we are sacrificing our bodies for democracy for the rest of y'all. And we have to acknowledge that. Because I tell you, like, your original question was about self-care. And I used to think self-care, the idea of it was the most frivolous thing in the world.
About that.
Right? Like my grandmother, Arlena Tillman, was born on a cotton plantation in Mississippi with a 4th grade education. How am I going to talk about self-care and I write for the New York Times? It seemed frivolous. Until I realized, if you watch the 1619 documentary series, you can see the toll that it's taken on me. You can see it in my body. You can see it in my face. I don't even like to watch it. It's painful for me to watch because I see how much it had impacted me when I thought I was doing okay. When people would ask the question, I used to joke. They'd be like, what's your self-care regimen? I'll be like, bourbon. And it always got a laugh line, but really, I was drinking too much bourbon. Like, really, I was not in a good place because you act like the attacks don't hurt you, but they do. You act like when you really believe in this work, like when this work is your mission, as I know it is for you, and I know it is for you, and they try to discredit your work, they're discrediting your ancestors' struggle, you feel like you're failing in some way, right? Like that burden is that we don't live long lives. Or the lives we live at the end are lives of suffering. So I think we have to acknowledge that it is unfair. Yes, black women will always do this work because we don't have a choice. But in forcing us to do this work, you are taking something from us as well. And so I don't even remember what your question was, but I just have to get that out there.
It was whatever got to that answer. Absolutely. Yes. Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions. I know we know what questions are because we're at a journalism school. We're going to ask some questions today.
I don't know if it's a question, but I simply want to say that you all are saying the quiet part out loud, and that is calling out the black people who are basically helping with our oppression. And I can remember writing about Clarence Thomas, because it wasn't only Anita Hill, but he slandered
Can you
his
introduce
sister.
yourself for the people
I
who
was
don't know
gonna
who you
say,
are, Ms.
yeah,
Baye?
we know who you
Betty
are.
Baye, class of 1980, from this great institution.
NABJ founder. Hello.
Well, not quite a founder, but I'm old enough to be one. But anyway, no, but I simply wanted to say is that is also something that we, again, protecting our own, we don't write a lot about how those, and name names of those who participate in the oppression. I mean, it's easy to say Clarence Thomas, but there are other collaborators. And I think that what I heard you saying today is that we don't talk about that enough. Not just what the white folks do, but how black folks participate in this and promote people who basically oppress us. And that's who get the jobs, that's who have the big titles, that's who's running the stuff, running these organizations, and become bigger roadblocks to telling the truth than if you had a white person there who had some consciousness.
Well,
Period.
yeah, okay.
Are you going to
Hello.
respond to that?
Well, I mean, listen, absolutely, because, right, that part, but also, this is lonely, but there are also some people who are very happy to be the only and would very much like to keep it that way, unfortunately.
Thank you all for this discussion so far. I'm E.R. Shipp, and I'm also an alum of this school and the law school and the School of Liberal Arts here at Columbia University. We keep hearing and we keep saying, even here, that democracy is under attack, that democracy is at stake. How do we, particularly those of us who are communicators, make that make sense to regular folks who can't articulate or can't understand what democracy has done for them in the first place? So how do we break it down so that we're not talking to each other, as we often are, when we say democracy is under attack, blah, 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 blah?
Love that question. So, one of the things that we've been doing at AAPF, we've been on tour for now the last 2 years, going from city to city, state to state, making concrete what it is that book banning censorship is trying to accomplish, right? It's not just trying to take certain books out of people's hands, but the ideas that the books contain from people's consciousness. So I think people have a sense academically, it's never good to censor, but when you actually put it in their hands, and of course 1619 people are always like, where's that? And so we've given away hundreds, and they open a page and read about the legacies of enslavement, and then we ask them, what does it mean that they don't want you to know that? It means that even if you do have the vote, you don't have the capacity to exercise that vote in a meaningful way, because the full understanding of the conditions that we live in, we don't have access to it anymore. So we go along with people who are doing voter education, and we do the education about what that has to do with democracy. The other thing that people don't often understand is that the whole allegation about the stolen election, the whole idea about we want our country back, the theft that they're complaining about is a racial theft. It's you people don't have a right to determine who leads me, who takes responsibility for creating the rules that our lives should live by. So it's not an accident that the focal point was Philadelphia, Atlanta, Detroit, Chicago. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't about all of the other areas where basically white voters determine the outcome in that area. There is a subtext of racial desert, racial, this is mine, not yours, that frankly the January 6th Commission gave us a window of it, but didn't give us the whole picture. Nor did they give us a picture of how much these ideas have infiltrated the police and the military. So the point that we try to make to people is, look, we've been in this country before when it was not even a semblance of a democracy. It meant you didn't get a chance to vote. It meant nobody cared about your issues. It meant laws were created that said you can't be educated. Laws were passed that meant you couldn't even testify against another person in a court of law if you were black. This is what anti-democracy looks like. This is what Americans' brand of fascism looks like. We've had it before. We can have it again. So it's basically putting the name of loss of democracy into our own history so people can recognize it for what it is, and so everybody else can recognize that the undermining of American democracy is going to come through racism. It's going to come through xenophobia. So we don't have to look to Europe to see what our future is. We only have to look to our past to see what our future is. That's what talking about democracy, I think, is when we do it from a lens that is sensitive to our particular history.
Yeah, and I think probably what I would add to that, I mean, folks literally need to understand that they have skin in the game in this too, right? When we talk about the threat to democracy, what that says to some folks is, oh, well, it's a threat. They may be threatened to, they may not have access to the ballot, but I'm still going to be able to vote. So this isn't really my problem, right? No, the erosion of rights, people being less free, less fair, and less equal headed into this election, like that is something that more Americans need to understand, that is not just about black people, that is not just about women, right? They literally need to get skin in the game to understand, and that is the case that we are certainly making at the 19th. And I know so many of my black women sisters in this work are also trying to make that case. Hi.
Hi. I am a journalism student from Morgan State University. From my growth in the journalism field so far, I have came to an understanding of my identity that is very far different from a lot of people. A lot of things within my identity are hated by America within the fact that I am a journalist. I am a black woman, I am an educated woman, and I'm also an undocumented immigrant. So when it comes to targeting and being vulnerable in these positions, I am very, very, very in the front lines. Oftentimes find myself being the only black undocumented woman in a room full of powerful black women. And I know that there are many, many other people like me. I guess my question is not necessarily to be inspirational, but more so, what are more practical and impactful ways that women like me can use when we already don't have the right to vote, when we already don't have the right to achieve a higher education in most states in America, when we already don't have the right to healthcare. So what are things that we could do to recognize ourselves in America and involve ourselves in a movement that is so impactful and important for black women? Yeah.
I want to tell you, you're extremely courageous for standing up here and sharing that with us.
Yeah.
So thank you. I guess the answer I would give you is so much of the black experience is trying to fight and achieve rights that we don't have, and that you should find yourself and see yourself in that tradition of fighting for rights that you deserve, that you don't yet have. And that can feel lonely, that can feel discouraging, because even amongst other women who look like you face a disadvantage that many of them don't face. So I'd also argue you may not know how many of those women in that room who seem powerful also have a similar story as yours. But this is what we are called to do as black women, in hopes that one day we will achieve the rights that we all deserve. And I think that so often, even to get to the question before that, as black people, you know, even when you ask about voting, well, I understand why black people feel that voting is not paying off for them, because often it's not, right? Often we're asked to save democracy or get this candidate in, and we have to be pragmatic voters. We have to vote to maintain the rights that we have, and as opposed to being aspirational voters, where we can vote for the things that we need. And so every 4 years when we're told, if you don't like your country, vote, well, shit, we're voting. Right. We've been voting. We vote at the highest rates of all people, and yet we get the least out of our vote. But we also know we don't have a choice. what choice do we have? So, sister, I just say there are a lot of people who have your back. There are movements that have your back, and sometimes it's going to take decades to get the progress that you want, but we are all called to fight even for a world we may not be able to experience ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hi.
Hi. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. I don't know. My name is Lillian Stevens. I'm a student at Morgan State University studying strategic communication. I forget who mentioned it, but when we were talking about Anita Hill, or when you brought up Anita Hill and you were talking about how we didn't even believe her as Black women, so how could, we enact change? And I'm going to posit a question that I've been turning over for many years now, and it's I wonder if it's less of that we don't believe ourselves when we come forward with these stories, and more of whether or not we have the numbers behind us to really enact the changes that we need, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in education or elsewhere, because there's more than 320 million Americans or people in America, but Black people are only 13% thereabout. So if half of that 13 is women, and half of that is women who are voting age, what can we really do?
And I'm never the positive person, but
I was like, wait a minute, are we
right? I'm feeling something unfamiliar, but
breaking news.
But I also have to say, I have to second with what Dr. Crenshaw said, is that we have seen miracles, right? Like I think a lot about when Frederick Douglass, 1835, could he ever have imagined that the system of chattel slavery could be toppled in 3 decades? Absolutely not. There would be no reason to believe that that's true. When you look at when Rosa Parks, when Dr. King, when Diane Nash, when John Lewis began their activism, do they believe they could topple racial apartheid in the United States? They had to believe it was possible, despite being 13% of the population. So, no, practically, it doesn't make sense that we can make that change. And yet we know Black people have been able to bring that change about. And personally, as hopeless as I am, like I don't think Black people will ever achieve equality in the United States. I don't believe it. There's no reason to believe that that's true. But what I do know is that we have no choice, unless we're to accept the conditions that we're in, than to struggle towards the conditions that we deserve, no matter what our numbers. And who knows what will be the next people who will bring about that next miracle.
I think we got time for one more before they pull us off the stage. So I'm so sorry that we're not going to be able to get to everybody. But yes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christina Blacken. I just want to say, first of all, this has been such an amazing gift to spend time and to hear from both of you. I teach and speak on narrative intelligence as a DEI practitioner, so that's understanding how cultural, historical stories affect what we do and what we think. And my question is around apathy, because I think one of the biggest tools of white supremacy is apathy, this hopelessness, this ability of things can't change. And my question is around this idea of a singular narrative, the hero's journey that we're taught about social change, where we're waiting for somebody in a cape and a suit come in and swoop in and try to save us from ourselves, or this idea that Black women are here to put it on our backs and save the next generation. And I'm wondering what you believe around how do we get people to feel like you don't have to be an exceptional person to contribute to social change? How do we get people to not feel apathetic in a social media system that benefits and is incentivized to make the most harmful things visible? So my question really is, how do we continue, if we're DI practitioners, if we're in institutions of power, to get people to feel like collective action can really make a difference?
Okay, I know you have some thoughts on this. I'll just quickly say.
I think we're doing a lightning round here. So
I'm going to be
we're
really
going to
okay.
get to these last
Go
two
ahead.
questions.
All of your questions,
I can be really
30
fast.
seconds or less, we can try to deal with them.
So I grew up in the UK but lived in the States for 5 years, and this is probably the most powerful session I've ever had and been part of on racial equality. Sorry, this is probably the most powerful session I've ever been to on racial equality. My question is, is there hope that's beyond a miracle?
Is what?
Where is the hope that's beyond a miracle? So what do I practically take away today that means that this is not just prayer and faith?
There is none.
No. The spirit of Ida B. Wells. every single day. Hi.
Hi, I'm Sadiqa Reynolds, came all the way from Kentucky to hear you all. This is an amazing conference. I'm always about the strategy. So are we ever trying to get into the room with the leaders of these legacy organizations, with the academic leaders, thinkers like you all, the journalists in a room to strategize, to think about how we move forward as a people? And I say that as a person who ran an affiliate of a legacy organization, and I think it is so important for us to lean on the people who can help us with the strategy. So all of the problems are the problems, but what is the strategy?
All right, well, on this one, yes, there are efforts every day to get the legacy organizations in a room. There are efforts every day to get researchers, academics in a room. There are efforts every day to get grassroots strategists in the room. I think the challenge is the question of apathy is one. But for some people, things are working. We have to remember that, and I'll throw politicians in as well, right? We have to remember that the primary directive is to stay in business. If you're a politician, you've got to, from day one, you've got to wonder about how you're going to get back in office again, right? And there are certain constraints, certain realities that are not necessarily dictated by what agendas are most important to the constituencies they're represented. I'm not saying that people are disconnected or unconcerned about it, but there's always a leavening reality that I have got to get elected, which means I've got to raise funds, which means I've got to ask whether this issue or that issue is going to undermine my capacity to raise money. Pull the aperture back and we see a whole range of issues that are now being shaped and framed and propagandized in a certain way that makes that equation different for them. So even if we're talking about distortions, even if we're talking about propaganda, even if we're talking about the incapacity of Black people to pass on their legacy to the next generation, the reality is if that framework has been understood to be anti-American, undermining the feelings of white kids, on and on and on, they're going to have to take that into account in deciding whether they want to lean in with a legislative agenda, with a comment, with defense of 1690 Project. I mean, there are all of these realities that make it that much more unlikely that they will show up in the robust way that in our heads we think they will. Now, the flip side, and I want to say this to the person that asked about what's there for us to remember and do, I'm always inspired by the Montgomery bus boycott. Why? First of all, that wasn't a boycott that came from the legacy civil rights organizations. In fact, some of them didn't even support it. It didn't come from the LDF. They didn't necessarily support it, but those people on the ground said, I'm going to walk every day that I need to until I get what I have a right to get, which is to be able to ride to work and not be humiliated, right? Yes. And they were the ones that sustained themselves coming together every night for the rally they needed, for the prayer they needed, for the singing, for whatever was necessary to remind them that they were not alone, they were part of a collective, and they were a righteous part of a collective. That's something that we need right now. And, you know, the question was whether, you know, I love virtual space. I love what it amplifies, but it does not create. This is not a virtual problem. Right. So it's not going to be solved by solely a virtual solution. We need three-dimensionality to our resistance. We need to remember what it means to come together again and to work and create and to demand and to expect and to support each other. So we're always trying to do that. We just had an event last week that Dean Cobb spoke at, in which we're trying to pull civil rights organizations together, human rights organizations together, movement for Black lives together. So we have one line that moves from now, that reminds me, May 3rd, Freedom to Learn, Day of Action, everybody should do something, into Freedom Summer 2024. This is an anniversary.
Yes.
But it's also essential for us going into November to at least maintain the possibility to fight to save the democracy, because it's going to be different depending on what the outcome is. Neither one will save us, but one will at least give us the ability to live to fight for another day.
Yes.
Can I add something? I know we're out of time.
No.
But let me just, I think this is why it serves us not to learn a mythologized version of history, whether that's white history or our history. Because when you do, then you think there was a black leader, which there never was. You think the social movements were led from the top, which they never were, right? They were led from everyday people in their own communities, people who did not on their own appear to have a lot of power, but collectively they did. I think about, MacArthur Cotton, who was literally tortured in Parchment Prison, who left Tougaloo College to join the movement. You think about someone like Diane Nash, right, who left college to join the movement. So we have to stop thinking that there's some savior, some single leader who's going to save us, because that takes away our power. When you study the movement, it was everyday people who were fighting in their own communities. Joanne Bland, 9 years old when she gets arrested for the first time in Selma in a children's march, 9 years old. So it is us. We are the answer. And sometimes we also have to realize social movements take a long time to bear fruit. You think, you march in 2020 and everything didn't change, so you give up and go home, then you're not really invested in change, because social change does not come overnight. Systems of white supremacy erected over 350 years don't fall in a summer of protest. They don't. And those of us who do this work also knew the backlash was coming. We knew we had about a 9-month window to try to get as much as you could get done in that 9-month window, just enough time for those in opposition to us to get organized and get their strategy together. And we should have already been coming up with the next strategy, but we were not. And now we find ourselves sitting on our hand with people who don't have the morals, the ethics, the values that we have, who will do almost anything to maintain power. So we have to be clear on what we're facing, but also where our power lies. There's a reason anti-CRT, anti-1619 Project comes in that moment, because a lot of white folks were connecting about this system, right? 1 out of 10 Americans took part in those protests. That's an astounding figure. At the height of the protest, 7 out of 10 Americans said they had had a conversation about racial injustice in their own household. 7 out of 10 Americans, and almost half of Republicans said race was a primary obstacle to black advancement. You knew that was going to get a response. It wasn't because black folks were making connections, it was because white people were. And so we have to be real about what it is that we're facing and how we fight those movements. The civil rights movement really begins at the end of World War I. We don't see that great legislation passed until 1960s. But if everybody was like, it didn't change overnight and gave up, we still would be living in racial apartheid in the United States. So I think we just need to understand what it is that we're facing, that we all have a role to play. And the last thing I'll quickly add, radical change does not come from people who work in mainstream institutions. Y'all looking to the wrong places. You're looking to the wrong places, right? It's not going to come out of the NAACP. It's not. Now, the Legal Defense Fund, yes, I think the Legal Defense Fund is doing and has been doing important work. But the difference between most folks, I work in a mainstream institution, obviously, but I work in a mainstream institution that cannot control me at this point, right? I'm there, I'm not there, I'm okay. Honestly, and somebody from the Times might be in the room. I don't need the Times to do my work, and that gives you a certain amount of freedom. But most of us working in mainstream institutions are never going to have the ability to challenge power as long as we are dependent upon that paycheck to pay our mortgage. So let's be clear where movements come from. Let's be clear where they won't. And yes, it is important to strategize with those folks, but also understand they are never going to lead us to our liberation at this point.
Yeah. Well, I'm so sorry. We've got to end it here. But yes, collective action is such a huge part of the solution to apathy. Strengthen numbers, and remember, black people show up for each other. It's not about a candidate. It's not about any one presidential cycle. Black people show up for each other, and so in the way that Ida B. Wells showed up for all of us, I hope that you all got from this conversation that her vision certainly is alive and well in this building, in so many of us, in so many of you. So thank you so much for the conversation.